I was browsing one of my favorite online marketplaces and I happened to see an ad of someone giving a mower away. I contacted them and they said it was still available, but then they asked me a very strange question. They asked me when I could get to their location. It's a strange question because they didn't mention their address in the ad. Not wanting to lose this opportunity to get a free mower, I told them I could be there in 15 minutes, and this is what I found when I got there. What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is this Murray lawnmower, and the problem is that it apparently won't start. I say apparently because I just got it out of the car and I haven't tried to start it yet. Let's take a good look at it and find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. Now in this video we try and repair this mower, however it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. When I got within a few houses of the location, I noticed a group of 4 people standing by the road. I then realized that was the house that was giving the mower away. I got out of the car and greeted them. I then told them I was there to pick up a mower, and this is what they presented to me. I asked them if they knew when it was last started, and they told me it was over a year ago, but the gasoline was just put into the tank, so it should still be good. I looked over the mower, and other than an interesting side chute arrangement and being covered in grass clippings, it looks to be in pretty good shape, so hopefully we don't find any terrible surprises like a bent crankshaft or the engine being locked up due to running low on oil. The first thing I want to look at is the oil and its condition to make sure that we have a chance at saving this mower. When checking the oil level, always wipe the dipstick off first and then insert it back into the fill tube. That way you get an accurate reading, and by the looks of it, the level is below the low mark, but at least it looks like it's fresh oil. That means someone must have changed the oil recently before putting it up. I'll just add a few ounces to get the level above the low mark. That way, if we get the engine running, we won't damage the engine any more than it already is. Now that we know there's plenty of oil in the engine, I want to try and start it. If we look at the fuel tank, there's still plenty of gasoline in it. However, I'm not sure how fresh it is, but by the smell, it's not that old, so it should still be usable. This engine has an auto choke system on it, so to start it, all we have to do is pull the rope till it starts. So unfortunately, it didn't even try and start, so we either have a spark, fuel, or an engine compression issue. To quickly rule out a fuel issue, I'm going to put some into the Carb's throat, and if it does start, we know that it's a fuel issue. However, if it doesn't start, then we'll do some more testing to see if it's one of the other 2 possibilities. After removing the air filter, it is quite dirty, however it's still usable because air can still pass through it. If we get it running later on, we should probably consider replacing it. So that was really strange. It started and ran after putting fuel into the Carb's throat, but I couldn't get it to start on its own. Now there might be a problem with the auto choking system, so we might have to look at the Carb. I know the engine isn't warm enough yet for a hot start, but I want to see if we can get it started again. So it still won't start on its own, and I want to confirm that it will only start and run when we manually prime it. If it does start, we need to inspect the carburetor for an issue. So yet again, it started, but we had to manually prime it to do it. Now we could leave it like this, but every time we wanted to start the engine when it was cold, we'd have to do the same procedure, which can be a real hassle. Before we start looking at the Carb, I'm going to give this mower a quick cleaning. Now this is not necessary for the mower to work. However, if there's a fuel or oil leak, I want to make sure I can see it. We don't need it to be spotless, just clean enough that we don't have to worry that some of the dirt might make its way into the Carb while we handle it. If you wanted to use a garden hose or a pressure washer, that would be fine too. Just make sure that you don't get water where it's not supposed to be. The first thing I want to do is drain the gasoline from the tank. That way we can see just how old it is by what color it is. I wasn't able to get all of it out, but as you can see, it's a nice light yellow color, which means this gasoline is not that old. It might be a couple of months at best. I don't think it's a fuel issue, but more than likely a partial clog inside the Carb. To prove that, I'm going to pour this gasoline back into the tank when we try and start it again. After all the bolts have been removed, we can now take the air filter base off the engine. Just remember there's an emissions tube connected to it as well. After that, I'm going to disconnect the fuel line from the carb. Just be very careful because this hose is very short, so you run the risk of breaking one of the ports off. To make filming just a little bit easier, I'm going to remove the top cover. Now you don't have to do this part, but I want to show just how the auto choke system works. If we take a closer look at the choke flap in the carb's throat, you can see it's closed when the engine is cold and open when it's running and stays open until it cools down. Now ours is working just like it should, so I don't think our starting issue is choke related. This linkage goes to the thermostat that sits on top of the muffler, and as it gets warmer, it will bypass the choke system. Now this one is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. The first thing I want to do is disconnect this lever from the top of the carb. To remove it, all we have to do is carefully pry it away from the rest of the carb. After that, we should be able to slide the carb off the engine. We then need to disconnect the linkage on top, and to do that, just rotate the carb. So there's still some gasoline inside the carb, and I want to collect it. That way I can see if there's any difference between what was in the bowl versus the gasoline that was in the tank. And I hate to say it, but the gasoline that was in the bowl is a lot darker in color than what was in the tank. So if I had to guess, this gasoline looks to be almost a year old. The next thing is to remove the two bolts that hold the bowl to the carb. Now the bowl is sealed to the carb by a large O-ring, so once the bolts are gone, we should be able to pry the bowl away from the rest of the carb. So this is the gasoline that was left in the bowl, and I want to see if there's any water in it. To do that, I'm going to pour it onto my board and see if any water droplets form while sitting on top of the gasoline that soaks into the board. And as you can see, there are no droplets of water. I'm going to pour some water onto this gasoline to show you what it would look like if there was water in it. And as you can see, it would have been pretty obvious if there was any water in the gasoline. Luckily, there wasn't any. So this is the main jet, and the gasoline must pass through it as it gets drawn into the engine. As you can see, it is not clogged, which makes sense because the engine does run after manually priming it. That means we need to remove this white part so we can clean it. To remove the assembly, very carefully pry it out of the rest of the carb. Now there must be a better way of doing this, but for right now, this is the only way I know how. Once it's out, you can see it's actually made out of two plastic parts, which we have to separate so we can clean it. So basically, we're just going to clear any holes that we can find. Now the opening on the left side, it looks to be partially clogged, so I'm going to try and clear it with a wire first, followed by some carb cleaner. And as you can see, it looks a lot better than before. If you don't have any carb cleaner, compressed air should work as well. After that, I'm going to clear the holes on the emulsion tube. Now this does take a little bit more time than using compressed air, but if you do use air, I would also wear some eye protection. I've cleared everything I could find, and even though I know this engine runs, I still tried to clear the main jet, but as you can see, there really wasn't much of a change. I've sprayed everything through with some carb cleaner, so now I'm ready to put the carb back together again. Now the main jet assembly only goes inside the carb one way. Now you could try to put it in the wrong way, but it won't seat properly. Now once inside the carb, press it down firmly and it should slide into place. The same thing goes for the carb bowl. There's a relief in the bowl for the main jet, so the bowl only goes on the carb one way. Once it's in place, you can slide the bowl into the carb. However, I like to get it started and then let the bolts pull the bowl into position. After the bowl is back on, we're now ready to install the carb back onto the engine. Before installing the carb, I want to make sure that the O-ring and its retaining ring are on the back of the carb. If it's not there, they might still be on the inlet pipe on the engine. If they are there, you must remove them from the pipe and put them back on the carb before installing it. Then reconnect the governor linkage to the top of the carb and slide it onto the inlet pipe. You don't have to push it too far back because when you install the screws for the air filter base, it'll locate the carb on the pipe for us. After that, reconnect the arm for the choke bypass and make sure it snaps back into place. Before moving on, make sure the arm can move like this one is, then we can reconnect the fuel line and its clamp. When installing the air filter base, make sure this port is connected to the emissions or breather tube, otherwise the engine will be breathing in unfiltered air. If that's the case, the engine might experience more piston ring wear than normal. Just so we can test the engine, I'm going to use the same air filter as before, but I'm just going to lightly tap on it so we can knock off most of the grass clippings. I'll order a pack of these filters in the off season when they might be a little less expensive. The last thing we need to put back on the engine is the top cover and the bolts that hold it down. I'll also put the gasoline we drained out of the tank earlier back into it so we don't waste it. I should have used a funnel, but I think I only spilled an ounce or so. There's one more thing I want to do, and that's to clean and service the wheels. I know cleaning the wheels isn't going to help this mower out, but it will complete its transformation from a non-running mower to one that works again. I think it also looks better if you decide to sell it, but to be honest, I'm sure most people just want a mower that runs than one that looks brand new and is broken. The very last thing is to remove the wheels and lubricate the axles. If you remove the wheels and there's a lot of rust or corrosion on the axles, try removing it first before putting on some lube. I like to use lithium grease, but use whatever you have available. Some lubes are better than others, but having any lube is better than none at all. Since this is a push mower without self-propel, reducing its rolling resistance will make it a lot easier to use. However, if your property is quite hilly, I would definitely use a self-propel mower instead. Once this mower is back on the ground, I think it's time to see if we can start this engine without priming it. So it took several pulls, but it finally started, although after filming, it started with only a couple of pulls. So I think the problem was a combination of two factors. The biggest one was that one of the openings in the main jet assembly was partially clogged, and the second was that the gasoline in the bowl of the carb was a lot older than what was in the tank. So just because you put fresh gasoline in your tank doesn't mean it's going to make its way into the carburetor, and I think that's what happened here. There was still some old gasoline in the bowl and fuel lines, so when they added fresh gasoline to the tank, it still wasn't going to start. So another option as to why this mower wouldn't start would be a partially sheared flywheel key. This would then advance the ignition timing and cause the engine not to start as easily as it should. The fix, of course, would be to replace the key on the flywheel. I think a great way to keep from having fuel go bad in your lines and your carb is to just run the equipment till the engine stops. That way the fuel system is empty, but using 100% gasoline with no ethanol and possibly a stabilizer should help as well. So my question is, do you run your equipment till the fuel system is empty before the off-season, or do you like to keep them full of gasoline? Personally, I run my equipment dry, even the ones with metal fuel tanks, because I think it's better, and I've had a lot of success using this method. If you're using a different method than mine and it works for you, I'd say keep using it. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.